Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our Ritual Night Talk for December 14th, 2021. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these Ritual Night events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Before I get much further, remember to like, subscribe, request notifications. That way you'll always know when we post a video, we go live with the video, we stream a video here on the Leaping Laughter YouTube channel. I also have included our donation link in the description to this video. No donation is too small, and all donations go to support the ongoing operation of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I also have included a link to an article on tonight's topic, which is the lesser ritual of the pentagram. I did an older video on this ritual back when we were doing stuff on Facebook Live, but as we're migrating over here to the Leaping Laughter YouTube channel, it kind of makes sense to do another one here with a little bit of updated information maybe, but pretty much covering the same territory, but also with better upgraded equipment and so forth. The Facebook one, we were still using older camera setup. The video is not as good, and so forth. And this is a really basic ritual that people commonly search for, that they commonly ask questions about. So having a definitive version of a video that just basically goes through, discusses the ritual, and explains how it works, and most importantly, demonstrates it, because that's something that you just can't get from books. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So I'm going to start off. I might have mentioned this in the old video, but I have since been corrected on this, that the idea of talking about lesser and greater rituals apparently does not come from the original Golden Dawn. I had a discussion with some Golden Dawn folks, like, no, it's called the ritual of the pentagram and so forth, apparently in the original papers. I'm not a Golden Dawn initiate. I'm not like a big, Golden Dawn scholar or anything like that. So I'm going to assume what I was being told there was correct. And so what that probably means is that the lesser and greater terminology actually comes from Crowley's publication of the ritual in Liber O, which is probably the first place the ritual appeared in print. It wasn't published by the original Golden Dawn. It was published by Israel Regardie when he published the Golden Dawn later on, but Liber O was published in the Equinox in 1910. And so and Regardie's stuff was published, I think it was the mid-1930s. So we're looking at a pretty substantial gap in terms of time there between when Crowley's publication of the ritual came out and then when the Golden Dawn material came out that Regardie published. But this is a ritual which is used in the Golden Dawn tradition. It's also used in the Thelemic tradition. And as a Thelemite, what I'm mostly going to be talking about is the Thelemic version of the ritual. It's not that different from the Golden Dawn version, but there are some differences that are interesting in terms of stuff you can look at in terms of what Crowley seems to have done with the ritual, which is he did a couple of small modifications that, maybe do or maybe don't, change the ritual or alter the ritual that much. But at any rate, I'm an initiate of the Thelemic system, so that's the version that I know the best. So that's the version I'm going to talk about. There are a lot of versions of this ritual, and as I go through it, I'll point out that there are places where, some teachers teach it this way, some teachers teach it that way, and there is some idiosyncrasy. So to some extent, if you could look at somebody doing their lesser ritual of the pentagram, you can tell, you get a little bit of an idea of where they learned it from, what books they studied it from, and so on. And so I'm going to start out by pointing out that lesser does not mean bad or insignificant, and greater does not mean awesome in the context of these rituals. The lesser rituals are used to set up your magical working space. They basically it's like setting up an invisible, like an imaginary magic circle to work with that. Okay, so the lesser rituals by themselves don't do that much in the context of creating any sort of specific magical change. But what they do is they set up a kind of field or working area that has certain characteristics. And so in that sense, these rituals really, they're foundational The idea that, oh, lesser means insignificant is just, it's kind of a silly nomenclature. And whereas, okay, then greater rituals are the rituals that you use for specific magical changes. So really, what you're talking about when you're talking about lesser rituals, you're talking about general rituals. So this is the general ritual of the pentagram. And the pentagram is a symbol of the microcosm, that is your psyche and your sphere of sensation. And so that is what this ritual corresponds to. It is the general ritual of your psyche or sphere of sensation. Okay, now, and some people use this ritual differently. I've experimented with it a lot, and I've talked to other people from other traditions who seem like they agree that my take on it is correct, but this is a microcosmic ritual. And that is, it mostly works on your psyche and your aura, which, it's like about this area here. It's sphere of sensation, aura, sphere of consciousness. All those terms are fairly interchangeable in magical discourse, and there are subtle distinctions between them. But basically, what this is this ritual is working with you, both your physical and spiritual components. Okay, and so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Like, you hear stories about, oh, so I got a Ouija board, and we got like a spirit on the Ouija board, and oh, we all got freaked out because it did something, and one of the people there knew this lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. They got up and they banished the Ouija board, and everything was okay. Well, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram doesn't banish a space, really. I mean, it sets up a component of a working space, kind of, but it mostly relates to your aura. If there's a spirit in the room and you do it, okay, I talked a little bit about this in my Earthbound Spirits video, but spirits will often run away because they don't want to be in the presence of a magical ritual like this. But it's not a case where this is something like, okay, you got a haunting and you can just like do this at once and you banish your house. It's like, that's not going to work. It can work on connections that spirits have into your aura or sphere of sensation. So sometimes if you develop some sort of an obsession with a spirit, like you can't stop thinking about it or something like that, sometimes what a spirit has done is it's created a durable, if not permanent, connection to your aura or sphere of sensation. And you can use this ritual to basically cut that connection. There's a technique that you'll sometimes see in neo-paganism where they take a dagger and they cut away around a person to cut connections like this. It's a similar kind of thing to that. It also incorporates some rudimentary, energy work kind of ideas. And it actually incorporates a lot of techniques that you'll use later. And this was kind of the training ritual as it was used in the original Golden Dawn. So what they would do is they would teach you this version of the ritual of the pentagram. And pretty much that was the only magical work you would do while you were going through the outer order grades, and you get invited into the inner order, and then they would start to show you like the greater rituals for doing specific magic and things like that. But it is important to note that most of the techniques that you're going to find in magic are techniques that you find used in the lesser ritual of the pentagram. And so, you'll figure out, how you want to vibrate names, how you want to visualize, how you want to breathe, and things like this. All these things are integrated into the ritual. And as a result, if you got really, really good at this ritual, then you'd learn another one. Oh, this is kind of, transferable, within that whole kind of, Golden Dawn or Thelemic milieu, depending on which you were going with. And what would happen is you'd have some transferable stuff. So this is a really good ritual to learn. Okay, it's not like the kind of thing where, okay, we'll teach you this ritual and you do this banishing ritual over and over again every day for a year and you'll get enlightened. It's not like that. Okay, you're not going to get enlightened just banishing. Really, you don't necessarily make a lot of spiritual progress just banishing, and I think that's kind of an important thing to talk about too. Banishing can clear out things like impediments. Okay, but magic is also not a system where, oh, you just like clear out all the impediments and then like you automatically spiritually progress, right? It doesn't work that way. You clear out impediments with banishing and you progress with invocations and, with, corresponding mystical work, such as meditation, energy work, and so forth. And you really have to have more components than just banishing. And this is the thing, I don't think a lot of places are doing this anymore as far as groups and stuff, but I don't do it with my students at all. There are groups where you'll get together and, oh yeah, well all you can do is banish for like the first year you're studying this. And then you'll maybe come back and we'll teach you something more useful. It's not that banishing isn't useful. It's just it has a limited scope. By more useful, I mean something with really more potential to transform your life in a more dynamic way. But it's not a bad ritual to learn, and it's a foundational ritual. So if you want to work the thelemic system, at bare minimum, you should know a lesser pentagram ritual and hexagram ritual. And pentagram ritual, the lesser ritual, the pentagram is one to start out on. From there, you can go on to working with the star ruby, which is Crowley's improved ritual of the pentagram, and is more specific to the thelemic tradition and isn't found other places. Unlike the LRP, which is kind of all over the place and taught in different versions in a lot of places. So you want to do this, but you don't have to stick to it slavishly for long periods of time. That's not the way that it works. At least as far as I've seen in my own practice and with my own students. You can actually get up to speed with a pretty good magical practice pretty quickly. It involves some invoking elements. So when you learn this ritual, I recommend you learn both the banishing version of it and the invoking version of it. They are exactly the same, except that the pentagrams are traced to different directions. So how you trace your pentagram determines whether you're banishing or invoking. That's true with hexagrams too, but with the Golden Dawn pentagram system, it's a little more idiosyncratic than what you see with the hexagrams. Hexagrams, you take the planetary point, you go clockwise or counterclockwise. In the pentagram, it's the clockwise and counterclockwise can vary in the Golden Dawn and thelemic pentagram arrangement, and it's based on in the pentagram moving toward the point or away from the point when you're banishing or invoking, instead of starting at the point and going clockwise or counterclockwise. So to some extent, to learn those, you just kind of have to memorize them, because it's a more complicated system than you can put the elements and then start at a point and go clockwise or counterclockwise. The Orm Solus does it that way. I experimented with that for a while because it seemed like it made so much more sense, but for whatever reason, the thelemic and Golden Dawn pentagram arrangement just seemed like it worked better in rituals experimentally. So that's why I went with it and have kept with it. And so that's why I teach it that way. Now, there are a couple of points in the ritual that we want to go through so that you understand it. One of the things that is an oddity about this camera setup is East is actually behind me. And so when I do this ritual, for the elixir rites and stuff, I go ahead and I do the first part, the kabbalistic cross, facing the camera, even though normally I wouldn't do that. Normally, I would do that facing away from the camera because you start facing east. But what I do is I face east, so I'm looking at the camera, and then I turn around and start in the east and go around when I do that. And I also call the archangels facing that direction. So here's how the ritual is put together. The first part of it is called the kabbalistic cross. And the kabbalistic cross, it's essentially a really simple way of using the Hermetic, Thelemic, Golden Dawn, Kabbalah structure to put certain points in the tree of life in your aura, along with vibrating certain words of power. So the gesture is it's a lot like a Catholic cross, except it goes the other direction. It goes to your right shoulder and then to your left shoulder. And what you do is you bring your finger to the point. You can use your index finger. You can use your thumb. I've been using my thumb lately. I sometimes switch it up a little bit. And so first you vibrate Ata, and then Malkut, either at the breast or down at the genitals, depending on how you're doing it. Crowley's Thelemic version of it, it's Ata, and you would vibrate the name of your holy guardian angel, and then Malkut at the genitals, and then back up. You can also use a generic name for the holy guardian angel. Some Thelemites use Iwas. You can also use word names like Yo or Adonai. That can work too. Or if you do some kind of a divination and you receive a name of your holy guardian angel, you can go ahead and use that, see how it works. In public, I don't vibrate that. What I do, I'll Ata, silently touch the center of my chest here, and then Malkut. Just because I like to keep my HGA name private, secret. I don't know that the secrecy is necessarily that important, but it seems like there's very little to gain by sharing that with anybody, so I don't. And some commenters have talked about, so it's Ata, which means unto thee, okay? And that's like, it's like a subservient attitude toward deities or something like that. I have seen that from a couple of people in a couple of places, and that's really not it. You're saying Ata unto thee, and who are you touching? This is your Ajna chakra, your forehead right here. So unto thee, or if you will, unto you. Okay, so unto you, unto thee being, thee is more formal. It can be more of a reference to like a higher self kind of idea, but definitely it's not, it's not unto thee being some deity that you're subservient to. It doesn't work like that. And especially with the holy guardian angel name, unto thee, holy guardian angel name. Okay, so now you're touching yourself, so it's you, and now you're vibrating the holy guardian angel name. And then Malkut is the kingdom. Then you touch your right shoulder. You say Ve Gebera, which is the power, and Ve Gedula, which is the glory. And then you clasp your hands like this. And this is kind of a cute thing that I've been sloppier about in the past than I should, but it's kind of neat. So take your fingers, you clasp them like this. You see your fingers are all crossed. What that does, that makes 5 crosses. And you vibrate in tone, actually, in this case. Leolam, amen. Okay? So the Kabbalistic cross looks like this. You've probably seen me do it. If you've seen any of these other rituals online, and you can bring up like one of the elixirs and see me do it. Ata, Malkut, Vegebera, Vegedula, Leolam, amen. And you can do this gesture more or less sweepy. I vary a little bit depending on how I'm doing the ritual. But that's the Kabbalistic cross. That is the first part of the ritual. And go ahead and, sit down and learn that so you know it. Okay, that is a simple ritual that you can use to kind of, ground your energy. If you do, like Qigong kind of breath work with your intonations, you can move a little bit of energy. It's a good preparation for learning the middle pillar ritual, which is a later practice, but not too much later. It comes up pretty quickly, and so forth. And so you can use this ritual to ground yourself, to calm yourself, to kind of stabilize your aura. As you can probably hear from the wording, if you grew up Christian, it's derived from the conclusion to the Lord's Prayer, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Because you're praying, you're referring to God. Here, though, it is, unto thee, touching you, holy guardian angel name, the kingdom, the power, the glory, and now forever and ever, amen, and a bigger sweep that time. The size of the sweep isn't that important, okay? So, and that's good. So do full breaths with your intonations. Eventually, as you get better at it, it'll go kind of faster. And I do cast kind of fast. If you look at my ritual, like, I've got to learn to do it as fast as Scott. No, you don't, okay? You don't have to do it as fast as I do. I kind of whip through my ritual forms, but I'm faster than most of the casters that I know. So it's more of an aesthetic preference. It's not like some little detail that's going to make a difference over the ritual working well or not. And again, that's another thing to keep in mind. We don't live in, with real ceremonial magic, we don't live in the Leviosa Harry Potter world, right? It's like, it's not like, okay, you intone the name and you don't quite pronounce it right and something is just going to go wrong or it's not going to work. That generally is not the case. There are a few things that do seem to make a difference, but, very specific details about exactly how you trace things, exactly how you intone things, exactly how you vibrate things, don't really seem to make a huge difference in how the ritual works, as long as you're engaged when you do it. You do it like you're reading out of a book, Ata Malkut Vegabra Vegala Leilama Man. If you do it like that, where you're not really, putting your will and intention and energy behind it, of course, it's not going to work as well. But in terms of little details, that's, it's kind of a horror movie thing too. It's like, well, basically I said the words. Yeah, but you missaid one word now, like demons are going to come and eat you. It's like the world is not like that. That's a completely Hollywood thing, and it's made up. Okay? So once you do the kabbalistic cross, so you're going to do the kabbalistic cross to start the ritual and to end the ritual. Okay? So they're like bookends. So you have kabbalistic cross at the beginning, you do the pentagrams, you call the archangels, and then kabbalistic cross at the end. Okay? So after doing the kabbalistic cross, we get to the pentagrams. And so there are two versions of this. Like I said, there is the banishing form of it, which is where you start on the point opposite your left hip. I think the camera reverses this or something, but what you're doing is you're taking your right arm and then you're pointing like this, so it's down kind of up close to the level of your left hip. Okay? And then you go up clockwise to make your pentagram. Okay, that is a banishing pentagram. For an invoking pentagram, you go from the top and you go down towards your left hip. So you start at the top and you go counterclockwise. This is an invoking pentagram. Okay? And it's the only difference between the banishing and invoking forms. So really, when you're sitting down and learning it, go ahead and learn them both because they're going to be important and, that'll teach you. Okay, so you got two of your pentagrams down. Now, the pentagram is traced like an earth pentagram, but the lesser ritual of the pentagram is not a banishing earth ritual, okay? If you want to banish the aspect that is elemental earth, you use the greater ritual of the pentagram for earth. This ritual does not do that. This ritual is foundational, and it works with a pentagram that's traced like the earth pentagram, although the god names are different going around the circle. As you do that, you're going to have a different god name for each direction with the same pentagram. So it's really not the same thing at all as doing banishing earth. And I have heard there's a rumor that goes around that, you see, beginning magicians are poor because beginning magicians do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and it banishes earth from their life. And that's in my experience, that is not even remotely true. And it's not even clear that this is an earth ritual. It's not really even an elemental ritual. It's like a foundational microcosmic ritual. And so essentially what you're doing is you're working with, you're tracing the element of earth according to one explanation because earth is the consolidation of all the elements. I also have an article speculating that maybe it's not an earth pentagram at all. It's just traced like one because there are cases in the Golden Dawn system where the water pentagram, the air pentagram, it's banishing water and invoking air, for example, are traced the same direction but visualize different colors, different god names. So that's another thing to think about. But without getting into too much detail on that, just this ritual won't make you poor. Just, accept that. Okay, now, so you're going to do the pentagram and you're going to do god names with the pentagram. And there are a couple of ways to do this. There's the way I do it, which is I will vibrate the name and kind of project it as I trace. That is not the most conventional way to do it. According to Libero, the god names are vibrated, and so how you do that is you're going to breathe in. As you go to your arms outstretched, you're going to breathe the god name, and you're going to visualize it kind of filling your whole body as you fill your lungs. And then once your lungs are full, you're going to vibrate, intone the name. You'll vibrate it forward with this sign, which is called the Enterer. And then you're going to retire in the sign of silence, which is your finger to your lips, like this. In the star ruby, it's specified. So if you see somebody doing the star ruby, they always do it that way. Lesser pentagram, I have found that vibrating as I trace works fine without that. Although, feel free to work with the version that seems to work best for you and seems to give you the best results. As always, experiment. If I tell you, it's like this, and you're like, you do it. No, it's not. Well, experiment and see, find out for yourself, because it is important to understand that magic is idiosyncratic. We don't have a general theory of magic. And so as a result, some of these individual differences could mean that the magic that you do doesn't work quite the same as what I do, at least in terms of some of these little, Leviosa kind of details and differences. So, you have 4 God names going around. Now, the first God name you are going to vibrate is Yahweh, Yad-He-Vav-He, or Yehovah, or Yehovah, or some variation like that. And yes, I'm aware that Yehovah and Yehovah are actually technically wrong, according to biblical scholarship. And Yahweh is maybe close, but they don't know, for the God name Yad-He-Vav-He. But one of the things that you shouldn't do, in my opinion, and experimentally it seems to hold up, is don't spell Yad-He-Vav-He while you're tracing the pentagram. Lots of teachers teach the ritual this way. So for Yad-He-Vav-He, the one God name in the East, right, they say, oh, well, just vibrate spelling out the letters. But for the other ones, you say them as words. That does not make sense to me. Why isn't your field like completely unstable from that? I've tested it practically. The probability shifts are better if you vibrate it as a word, regardless of what the word is. So you've got 4 4-letter words of power going around the circle, all vibrated as words. So Yahweh is in the east, Adonai is in the south, Eheyah is in the west, and Agla is in the north. And you're going to go around and you're going to trace your pentagram and vibrate that name to all 4 of those quarters, starting in the east and then completing the circle. So that's the next step of it. So let me show you what that looks like. And now I'm facing east because camera, this is actual east. All right, so that's the second step. If you were going to do it tracing and vibrating, it would be like this. Yahweh. Adonai. Eheyah. Agla. Always complete the circle when you do that, so you're standing, again, facing east. And make sure you bring your hand around to complete it, because it's a circle. You're making a circle. If you're doing the invoking form, you would do that exact same thing, but you would trace the pentagrams in the invoking form instead. All right, so then you call the 4 archangels. The 4 archangels are Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel. And because of, you talk about like which hand they're on and which direction, I'm going to turn around to do this. But what you say is, before me Raphael, behind me Gabriel, on my right hand Michael, on my left hand Uriel, to call them. And you intone the names. It's not, you don't do like any kind of a projection vibration. You just kind of intone the names as you call the archangels. And I'm going to turn around and hopefully this looks okay. And we're more to the point, sounds okay, because I got sound bouncing off that. But so I'm facing east. Before me Raphael, behind me Gabriel, on my right hand Michael, on my left hand Uriel. So that's the 4 archangels. And then the final statement is, in the Thelemic version, about me flames the pentagram, and in the column stands the 6-rayed star. And this is a little bit of a complicated visualization. So what Crowley is talking about is something that looks like this. So first of all, you're standing on the tree of life at the intersection of Samekh and Pei. So you're facing Tifereth in the east. Okay? And so you're going to have, the visualization is there are going to be 4 pentagrams to each of the 4 sides. It's like you're in a box. And then above you is a hexagram, symbol of the macrocosm, and below you is a hexagram, the six-rayed star. And so you're standing in a column of energy that is formed with those hexagrams at the top and bottom. So imagine it's three-dimensional. And this is running, through your spiritual channel, which is through the center of your body. Okay. Crowley talks about how the pentagram should be visualized strongly as though they might be formed from flames, and fire has been lit by this method. But anyway, this isn't a power to be aimed for. I've never met anybody who, doing a pentagram like this by whatever means, has been able to light a flame. I mean, maybe someday I'll meet a pyrokinetic. It's a known psychic talent that a handful of people apparently have, but I've never met anybody who could do that. And at any rate, the point is, you want to visualize them as best you can, and same with the archangels. So you could visualize Raphael as an angel in yellow, holding a wand, usually a caduceus wand. Michael in red, holding a sword. And that people talk about that, where Raphael has the wand and Michael has the sword. And there's this thing where the wand is fire and the dagger is... But anyway, there's also a thing in some texts where you have the wand is fire, the dagger is air, but then the sword and the staff flip, and the caduceus is actually more of a staff than a wand. I've seen that one too. Point is that these weapons go with these angels, and they're not necessarily completely consistently elemental, so keep that in mind. Although they are the archangels of the four elements. So if you were using like the greater ritual of the pentagram for air, you would probably be conjuring Raphael, and you're visualizing it in yellow, he's yellow, and so on. Then Gabriel is in water, is in blue, color of water, holding a cup. And then Oriel is in black, holding the pentacle, which is the weapon of earth. Now, in my experience, there really is a presence that is called in when you just vibrate these angel names. They do appear to a degree, although not to the same degree as if you evoke them, like with a sigil and all that kind of stuff. But calling on them and creating that connection to them is, I think, one of the reasons that spirits get chased off by this stuff. So here, okay, you're calling on these four powerful entities, and also these four, powerful God names. Whether or not, you're projecting anything outward, you're working from the perspective of yourself, from the perspective of the microcosm. But it's important to understand that spirits also just don't like being around, magic in general, where you're conjuring stuff. So that's an important thing to understand. Also, that last line does do a little bit of a shift to the ritual. Like some versions of it have, before me shines the six-rayed star, behind me the six-rayed star, within me, all this kind of stuff. Crowley says it's a column. And what Crowley is doing is he's basically tipping this flow of mesla energy vertically in your visualization to line up with your body's spiritual channel. Whereas in a Masonic lodge, you would see where mesla, the flow of energy, goes from east to west. And the Golden Dawn was based on a Masonic system. So Crowley has taken that and turned it vertical, which is kind of interesting. One other point that I like to make, which isn't really that important. Some people say pentagram, some people say pentagram. And the reason I say pentagram, okay, Liber O has pentagram, and the reason is that you are the pentagram. I mean, you're visualizing pentagrams around you, but think of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. I mean, you are the pentagram. It's the microcosm, it's the human being. That's what it's a representation of. And so, about you flames the pentagram, not necessarily pentagrams, plural. Although a lot of people do it that way, and it doesn't seem to affect the ritual a whole lot. I pretty much see pentagrams used interchangeably by people. I do like to do a pentagram myself, though. So, and you're going to say that, again, I'd be facing east saying that, but you're not calling spirits or anything like that. So I just went ahead and said it facing the camera, but you would say that facing east. And then the final thing you would do is that you would do your concluding kabbalistic cross, Ata, Malkut, Vega Bara, Vega Rula, Leolam Amen, and that concludes the ritual. So, I think those are most of the basic points that you need to know about this to just actually to do either version. As a daily practice, I recommend people, you could start off just doing the lesser banishing version, lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, like a lot of people recommend. But I do recommend adding the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram as soon as you can. One way to do that is do your lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram when you get up in the morning, and your lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram when you go to sleep. So that way, what you're doing, you still have this dynamic balance of, so you get up and you're like building your energy and you're calling, some power, you're empowering your aura, your sphere of sensation. And then at night, you're calming your aura, sphere of sensation, eliminating, blockages, hooks, obsessions, those kinds of things. One more thing to point out, and then I think I'll wrap this up. Doing this ritual will get your psychic senses working better. Much of magic runs on psychic senses, so that's a good thing. But here's the deal. When you turn your psychic senses on, you're going to start to notice stuff. And so there was this old superstition in the Golden Dawn that, when you start doing magic, things like larvae and spirits start noticing you, and they'll decide they're going to mess with you, or they wouldn't do it before. Not true, at least in my experience. When your psychic senses come on, you start to see some of this stuff happening. But the deal is that spirits, they're all over, everywhere, all the time. They're in everything. I mean, I'm a panpsychist. I think, consciousness pervades the universe, and a spirit is just a particular manifestation of consciousness, just like the human mind is. And so, these things are everywhere. And when your senses come on, you start seeing them. Important thing to keep in mind is they were there the whole time, and they are no more willing to mess with you after you do magic than before. They could have been messing with you a lot before, and you wouldn't have noticed it because you haven't turned your senses on. See, that's how it really works. And so, if anything, like I say, spirits will kind of, they'll tend to leave you alone if you're doing regular ritual work. And regular is important. That's the one other point that I try to make everywhere, is that get to the point where you're doing these rituals every day. You really want to focus on that, especially if you're starting out. Okay, get to a point where you know the ritual, and you could do the ritual, and you could stick to it on a daily basis. That's the real discipline of magic, is sticking to your practice on a daily basis. And it gets harder than you think. There's stuff that comes up that happens, and that I don't know that I have a good explanation for why that is, but there are points in your practice where you'll feel like, I shouldn't have to do this. I don't need to do this, whatever. The discipline is overcoming that and actually doing the practice. It's not about, it's not about magic is supposed to hurt. It's not about, trying to always push yourself to every physical limit. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about doing the practice, back to the circle, day in, day out. And that's how you get good, is by focusing on those rituals. Now, there are other rituals besides the lesser ritual of the pentagram, of course, that you'll move on to, as you learn more for your daily practice. But those are going to be covered in different videos. So for tonight, I'm going to be signing off. That is the lesser ritual of the pentagram. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of the evening. Love is the law. Love endure well.